What's up, friends? Okay, so today we're going to be going over the new Mortal Kombat movie. So this is a 2021 film that is currently on HBO Max, although it might disappear pretty soon. So this movie has a runtime of about an hour 50 minutes, and it's directed by Simon McQuoid. So Mortal Kombat stars a lot of the characters from the classic video game. People like Sub-Zero, Scorpion, starring as some of the main protagonists and antagonists. But we also have Sonya coming back. We have Melina. We have Liu Kang, Kano. All characters from the video games that make presences in this movie. We also have some new characters, like Cole, who's the main character, played by Louis Tan. So Cole, he's kind of discovering his own powers and entering the world of Mortal Kombat for the first time and learning about how everything works. Out of all these characters, I will have to say there's one that really steals the show, and unfortunately it's not the main character. So my favorite character, and I would argue the best character in this movie, was actually Kano, surprisingly. So Kano is played by Josh Lawson, and in this movie he adds a lot of the humor and comedy in this film. A lot of the characters, as you'll see, are very one-dimensional. Kano, on the other hand, definitely stole the show. His jokes are usually pretty on point. He has a great sense of humor. So, low-key, I'd say he carries, not gonna lie. That's not to say all the other characters are garbage, right? A lot of the characters are good and they suffice. But altogether, none of the characters seem like people you'd want to be friends with, per se, other than maybe Cole. Cole's cool too. But all the characters are very straightforward, very let's just do this and leave kind of deal. So it doesn't create that bond between the viewer and the characters. And to that point, I think honestly this review can be summed up in almost about a sentence, just because it's very clear as to what the movie is. And in my opinion, the best way to think about what this movie actually is a bunch of characters and a lot of plot, essentially all designed to set up these fight sequences between two characters usually, which are really the star of the show. The fight sequences are definitely the star of the show in this film. A lot of the plot exists solely to set up these fight sequences. So in that sense, it's not really well built, well fleshed out. It just exists only to have these fight sequences happen. Let me tell you something, the fight sequences are awesome, right? But when you watch a film, you kind of expect a little bit more than just fight sequences sometimes, and if that's what you're looking for, this might not be the film for you. So in terms of critical acclaim and critical reviews, currently the movie's sitting at a 55% Rotten Tomatoes, a 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb, and then 87% on Google audience reviews. The plot essentially centers around a group of bad guys, including Sub-Zero, who threaten the world and Earth, and they aim to destroy, I guess. It's very vague, and that's kind of one of the downfalls of the movie, is it doesn't present enough justification for the bad guys, and it assumes you know everything but the games as to why the characters are acting the way they are, which is fine, right? If you played the games, if you're a huge fan of the series, you kind of understand that these two sides just always fight, and it's influenced by deep lore history, especially between Sub-Zero and Scorpion. A little bit of that relationship is shown in this film, but essentially all the other characters are kind of just, the bad guys are, we're here to destroy the world, and the good guys are, we can't let that happen. It's very straightforward, very bland. But essentially, the bad guys are here to take over the world, and Cole has to team up with Sonya and the good guys to protect the world, essentially. And beyond that, unlock their hidden secrets, their hidden powers, so that they have the ability to protect the world moving forward. So in terms of characters, and if you fall in love with them or not, as I mentioned before, it's very straightforward, bland characters, so I wouldn't say you'll fall in love with them, but there are some standouts, like I mentioned Kano, right? And honestly, he seems like a very fun dude altogether. But beyond that, if you have any fan favorites from the games, they probably will be your fan favorites in this movie as well. Not everyone is as well animated and as and represents the games as original. Sub-Zero and Scorpion definitely carry in terms of action, but also in terms of character development. They both sort of pretty well resemble their video game counterparts, and you understand why they're doing what they're doing. The other characters, not so much, but these two, for sure. The acting for the characters is good. It does a trick. None of the acting is bad per se, but none of it is above and beyond to where it sells the role. Other than Kano, again, like I mentioned. But even Kano, he's just kind of like the funny character who's along for the ride, right? I mean, he's a little bit more realistic than some of the other characters in terms of how they'd react to the situations that happen in the film, but other than that, all the acting is pretty straightforward. It's cool to see the classic lore from the games, especially if you've been a longtime fan. You're gonna recognize some of the little odes and Easter eggs and references to the games. In terms of if the film holds your attention altogether, I would say that if you're a fan of the games, if you're a fan of like action movies that have very limited plot, and if you're a fan of just really cool looking characters and strong CGI, then you'll most likely be very invested in this film and watch it all the way through without any complaints. Like, essentially what I'm saying is if you're here for the action, you're not going to be disappointed, because the action is definitely there and it's definitely awesome. And this is definitely one of those films where you kind of want to shut off your mind and just watch. You know, you don't want to be analyzing the film, you don't want to be thinking about the things that happen, because as soon as you start poking holes, it's going to be very obvious that there are a lot of plot holes and there are a lot of things that go down in the film that wouldn't really go down in real life, that wouldn't really be realistic in any way. The plot for this movie is also relatively predictable. Events occur that it'll be obvious as to what they're going to lead to, as to what the outcome will be, and you just kind of have to sit back and watch it all go down. So as I said, this is definitely not one of those films you want to be thinking about and scrutinizing and analyzing, because it just won't hold up over time. But if you're here for a good time, it can be a pretty fun time if you love action. In terms of what's unique about this film, I would say definitely the most unique and the part that really draws you in is the action. Like I mentioned before, seeing these powers and these characters fight, it's really hard to describe, but it's so engaging. If you don't mind a little bit of gore, and in fact a lot of gore, if you don't mind gore and excessive violence, then this is definitely your type of film, because there's a lot of grotesque violence, a lot of what are in the game called finishers, right? But in this movie, they're just scenes and like ways characters die, but they're pretty gory and they can be pretty brutal. Other than that, other than the action, there's nothing really that unique about this film. Scorpion and Sub-Zero are well built. They both are pretty awesome, so they're pretty unique. But even them, it's kind of like, it's easy to tell why Scorpion is doing what he is doing. Sub-Zero is a little bit more hard to figure out, and if you don't know the lore of the games, then you might have a hard time figuring out why Sub-Zero is actually doing what he's doing. So generally, like, who would like this movie? So definitely if you're a fan of action films with limited plot, if you're a fan of gory action violence, if you're a fan of martial arts and like mythical action magic violence, if you're a fan of good guys versus bad guys films where it's very straightforward who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, and the film is essentially kind of like a superhero movie, like an Avengers movie, but without all the deep character development. So in terms of perfect setting for this movie, I would definitely say it's a great film to watch with friends, especially if you're a little out of it, just because you don't really have to follow along. You could just tune out and then catch the fight scenes as they go on. And along that point, I think this film is also great for just putting on in the background while you work on a project or while you work on something, just because, again, like I mentioned, it's easy to follow along. Everything's very straightforward. There's not too much complexity. And the action scenes are cool enough to be worth checking out the film for. So if you're working on something, you could just tune out while all the character development, plot kind of stuff is happening. And then just watch when all the awesome action scenes come in, and honestly when Kano's on the scene, because he's pretty funny. In terms of similar movies, honestly it's hard to compare, just because any movie that has a ton of action with no real plot is pretty much the same as this movie. But a couple that came to mind is like Ronin 47, the movie with Keanu Reeves. That one was kind of similar, where it's like awesome action scenes and characters look really cool and have cool powers, but the storyline's kind of like, you know, very straightforward. Another movie like Warcraft, which is a movie based off of a video game, and it's very similar in that, like, I think Warcraft had a little bit of a better plot, but it's along the same lines of the characters are from the game, so it has that lovability in terms of, oh, I played the games, love to see the characters in real life and, you know, in the real world. But beyond that, it's like they're not well fleshed out. And if you're not a fan of Mortal Kombat, if you're not a fan of the series, if you've never played any of the games, then you just might not resonate with any of them, to be honest. So in terms of overall rating, I would give this movie a 2 out of 4, meaning you can watch it in the background pretty easily. You can watch it if you're, again, like I mentioned earlier, really out of it, or if you just don't feel like investing in a very plot heavy, in a very detailed, in a very well built film. If you just want an action film to relax by the end of the day, maybe on a Saturday night, Friday night, just to decompress, then this is a great film for you. So I'd recommend checking it out. If you're a fan of the series, if you have some time and you like really gory, violent action, then this, you know, I'd recommend checking it out. It's not that bad. But if you really need, if you love plot, if you love strong characters, if you need, you know, some substance, and if you're the type of person to scrutinize a film and try to find like holes in the plot, then I would not recommend this film, because you're gonna end up hating it the entire way through. At this point, if you're very interested in checking out the film, I would recommend clicking off, because I'm just gonna be doing the parents guide, which might contain some spoilers, and then a little bit about what I learned from the film, as in like takeaways from the film at the very end. So if you're hopping off at this moment, thank you for watching the video, and please like and subscribe if you liked any of the content in this video. Thank you so much, and on to the parents guide. So in terms of action, it's gonna be very clear right when you watch the film, but this movie is definitely a 5 out of 5 in terms of action. The sequences are very, very gory, very bloody, and they're created to be visceral and gory. That's the purpose of the film. Because the games, especially the brutalities and the fatalities, emphasize that gore, and that's reflected in this film. So you'll see some pretty horrible finishers, right? And you see the character getting cut in half. And so it's all CGI, you know, it's obviously not real, but it's still, it can be scarring, can be graphic if you aren't used to that level of violence. So in terms of action, I'd definitely put it as 5 out of 5. So it is very engaging, but it is very gory. In terms of sexual content, I'd give it a 0 out of 5. There's really none. I could barely even catch a sexual joke or so. Kano is a little bit probably the only one that makes any sort of jokes that might be sexual in nature, but they're very limited. In terms of language, I would give this a 4 out of 5. There's a lot of uses of the F word, a couple other swear words. It's not too pervasive. It's not like Uncut Gems where it's like a swear every second. So because of that, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. If you really hate swearing, then I wouldn't recommend this film, but if it doesn't bother you, then I wouldn't say it would detract from the film. And that concludes the Parents Guide. Overall, I wouldn't recommend this film for people, one, who can't handle violence. If violence really turns you off, then I would not recommend this film, because that's pretty much the only point of this film, low-key. Also, if you are younger and you just haven't seen very much actually gory violence, really graphic violence, I also wouldn't recommend this film. I would say definitely it wouldn't be one to show kids or younger age children, but teenagers and people who, you know, if you play Call of Duty, if you have played any of the Mortal Kombat games, and if you can handle that level of violence, then you should be more than fine to watch this film. So now I'll be talking about a couple of things you learn from this film. And there's not really too much, but there's one thing specifically that I found very awesome. So one of the coolest lessons I learned from this film is the idea that everyone has the ability to and should work on unlocking their power. And what exactly does unlocking your power mean? So essentially, I truly believe, and this film shows a little bit, that every single person in our globe, in our world, on Earth, has a hidden ability. Something that makes them unique, makes them different than others, and some sort of character, some sort of quality that makes them them, that makes you you, you know? And I'm speaking to the person who's watching this video right now. You have something in you hidden. It could be a hidden talent, it could be you've already discovered it. If you've already discovered it, fantastic. You're probably already on your way to unlocking your full potential, you know? But if you haven't, there is a power. So, you know, bring that power to light and utilize it, harness it, and you'll find that, honestly, the world will thank you for sharing that power. The other thing is every power is overpowered in its own way. What I mean by that is You know, you might think, oh, my ability is something simple like I'm double jointed. Maybe it's something super simple like that. Maybe it's something cooler where it's like, oh, I'm really, really good at chess. One example, which I wish I remembered his username, but there's this guy on TikTok who can spin a top on his foot, on his shoes. Another power. You're really good at yo-yo. You're really good at spinning tops, whatever. Either way, like, you have a power, a hidden potential. Something that you could work on, something that you could hone, something that you could weaponize. Find it and use it. And use it to make yourself a better person, and use it to better the world. Help share that power and that ability and share their strengths. So overall, Mortal Kombat, I recommend checking out if you're a fan of action films. If not, it might be a pass. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.